Okay, now this is the one we've all been waiting for. Ultima III Exodus.
I think if anyone has been waiting for anything, it would have been Ultima 4.
Well, that and Ultima 3. Come on, you was the one who advocated for it the last time we were here.
Yes, and if you were to skip out on it, I would be highly disappointed with you. But Quest for Avatar is the highlight of the early Ultima games, so my point still stands.
Anyway, let's play Ultima 3. So, the first thing I should point out is that this time around some major changes have occurred in terms of gameplay, the most noticeable of which is that now instead of playing as one character, we have an entire party. Furthermore, there are 5 races and 12 classes to choose from, so it seems like reading the manual will be a given here. Let's make a standard team: a fighter, a thief, a mage and a cleric. And with this assembly we shall...
George, couldn't you have made a more boring party? There are 12 classes, and you chose the most basic ones.
I'm sorry. Didn't know you was this picky. Okay, let's pick an alchemist then and...
Don't pick an alchemist.
Huh? Why?
He's a really bad choice here. You'll regret picking him later.
Fine. What about the illusionist?
Don't pick him either. He's terrible.
The druid?
The druid is a great choice. He'll make the beginning much easier.
Oh, I thought you were doing one of your... Never mind. What I eventually settled down upon is a team consisting of a dwarven paladin named Duane, a fuzzy female bard, lark, yeah. This little furball shall hence be known as Lil Wheel. Worth noting that there are more than 2 genders in Ultima 3, so I've made myself an elven barbarian of the other gender. Because, let's face it, we need someone to deal with traps in our party. And, you know, barbarians are good at dealing with traps. Its name, by the way, is Robinson. Last but not least, we have a little bobbit druid, appropriately named Team Leary. Are you happy now?
Very.
And with that array of characters, we are off. Well, this is a good start. We have an open field with a castle and a town for a first screen, just like in the first game, and not the confusing time portal nonsense of the second one. However, things start feeling a bit sketchy as we enter the castle. Do you notice anything weird going on with the visuals? It probably looks a bit confusing, but there is a visibility mechanic now, which makes movement a bit more difficult than it used to. What also complicates walking is a certain delay between the button press and the character actually moving. It's a bit tricky to explain, but if you hold down the directional keys, the character will just keep walking long past the point when you let the button go, which leads to something like this happening. So what you end up doing is tapping the directional key instead of holding it, which is rather uncomfortable. It's not a deal breaker, but the reason I bring this up is because the first 2 games had no such control issues. But anyway, we walk up to the Lord British, or rather make a running faceplant into a wall right next to him, and initiate transaction. Forward. With Robinson, Jesus! 3 commands just to talk to someone. But okay, this time around he doesn't take pence. Apparently he got enough gold from the first 2 games to carry him through this one. Instead, what he does here is raise the maximum amount of health each time you level up. Can you believe that this is the first time in the series when leveling up is actually beneficial to the player? And for more reasons than just one. The party level still determines the frequency of the enemy encounters, so to be able to level up faster you, ironically, have to level up first. Which is not as easy as it may sound, because I've been going around the world map for quite a while now and have yet to meet a solitary enemy. In fact, I've been doing it for so long, we've started to run a bit low on food. The food mechanic is by now a tradition of the series, so there is no surprise in seeing it here. But you see, in the prior entries, you only had one character to feed. This time you have 4 people that continuously consume their own reserves of provision. And there are no enemies to get money to even buy the goddamn food. I'm starting to feel a bit desperate here. There must be some other way of making a quick buck without killing enemies. I wonder if this person minds if I... Well, that answers my question. Wait. No way. Huh. The combat actually, has gameplay this time around. Wow, I'm actually shocked to see some rudimentary strategy after the button mashing nightmare of the first 2 games. It's honestly such a giant leap in quality that it pretty much just... Oh, the guards. Guess I shouldn't have been murdering people for cash. So how do you, run away? Well, let me look up a reference guide. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I can't find which is the escape button. Seal?
There is no fleeing mechanic in Ultima 3.
Good to know. Guess that means I'm dead. Well, that was rather anticlimactic. Being killed off by guards after starving in poverty and enacting robbery out of pure desperation. A truly epic journey. The problem here, right, is that those characters stay dead. The idea is that you can rearrange a party with different characters and resurrect the first ones. However, considering the prices of resurrection, this is not going to happen. Thankfully, we still have the other bunch of characters, and even though I'm not planning on beating the game with them, they'll be useful to just explore the map until they starve. The towns continue the trend of making it big, but this time around I don't have a problem with it. Each town has a distinct personality, which makes it feel unique and interesting. For example, there is a town that's basically a deep dark forest with some locations hidden inside of it. Oh god. There are the 2 twin towers. There are the 2 twin towns that, due to the quantity of guards and the strict layout of the place, remind me of dystopias. Oh. Another feels like a thieves' town more than anything. And hey, you can actually buy consumables now. Remember how we had to kill thieves to get torches? Well, now we can just buy them like normal people. From the Thieves Guild. What is this Garrett and this thieves carrying torches gimmick? If anything, a thief would want to keep himself in the dark. I would think. Jesus Christ, I can't say dark without yelling it. Fuck. There are also shops here, but anyway, you get the idea. The towns are now interesting to explore because of their personalities and neat little touches like finding 2 gargoyles hiding by the river that tell you to depart or die, or seeing 2 jesters being tortured in the Lord British's castle. Which one is more romantic, I'll leave you to decide. There is also a bunch of dungeons around, but I don't have any torches to spare. Oh wow, an actual enemy. Let's try killing it. Well, it didn't work. So okay, I'll just remake the first party, but this time we're gonna play it smart. I'll make a backup folder of my saves, and in case anything goes wrong, I'll replace the main folder content with the backup one. This will alleviate some stress off of me. So my idea is, since we don't know how to improve our stats yet, we should focus on earning enough money to first get food and second buy decent equipment. The dungeons are surely going to have enemies within them, so to survive we'll probably have to go straight for the Thieves Guild, buy some torches and then enter a dungeon. Oh, never mind, guess it's my lucky day. It really does add a lot to the gameplay to actually have a combat system this time around, and considering how rare those encounters are, it makes every battle feel special. As you might expect, fighting enemies results in taking damage, and you can still restore it in exchange for money like in previous games, or you can use the cleric's Sanctus spell for free. This is where Team Leary comes in. The reason why Druid is so useful at the earlier levels is because he restores mana twice as fast as any other class, so it makes the healing procedure, which you'll inevitably have to perform, this much easier. There is a dynamic going on. Healing takes mana. Mana is restored over time and time depletes food. So having someone with faster MP regen is basically allowing you to save up a lot of otherwise wasted resources. What wasn't helpful was the fact that even though Paladin is one of the best classes in the game, I went a bit too easy on his wisdom stat. You see, the MP of character is directly related to his stats, wisdom for clerics and intelligence for wizards. So 15 points in wisdom means 15 MP. However, multi-classes like the paladin get only half of the points. So the problem is, Dwayne over here turned out to be a bit too stupid to cast a healing spell that costs 10 MP. And since I have no idea how to raise his wisdom, he will remain clerically impotent for the foreseeable future.
He'll be much more useful than a cleric later.
So it looks like some characters are better at the start, some during the endgame. But still, every class is useful at one point or another during the game, making it a very balanced RPG system.
Not at all. Ultima III is a terribly imbalanced game. There is a clear gradient of usefulness when it comes to classes, and Paladin is simply a better overall pick than a cleric.
Never mind then. Since we can't improve the stats, the only means to getting stronger is through leveling up and buying more powerful equipment, which is difficult since all the money we get is being spent on food. Oh wow, check it out, there's a slingshot in there. Imagine that, you can actually find equipment from time to time. But let's stick to the plan, shall we? I've bought some torches, found a dungeon, let's do this. Oh, dungeons got a bit of a renovation done to them. I see. And it's freaking confusing. Do you see how weird the perspective is here? It probably doesn't make any sense on the video. Look here for instance. This is a perfectly square room. I'm currently just rotating in place and it just doesn't click with me. It looks awful.
The reason for the new graphics is that they allow to implement a much more elaborate dungeon design to that of the first games. This square room you're criticizing was impossible to make back on Ultima 1.
Okay, I get that it's a technological step forwards you. I just really wish it wouldn't be that difficult to look at. Maybe over time I'll get the hang of it. But yes, there is much more encounters in here than on the surface, as well as some treasure chests that just hang around. I'm glad to say we are finally making progress. By the way, check out this spell. It has a random chance of killing each enemy of this particular type on screen. It doesn't waste any MP, but you can only use it once per fight. It's analogous to the death spell from Final Fantasy or Shin Megami Tensei, except I think it's far better realized here. Those random kill spells always feel like a waste of turn and mana, which is why I pretty much never use them. In Ultima 3, this spell is basically a free chance to avoid or simplify a random encounter. It's actually freaking brilliant. if the spell fails, you just have to deal with another regular encounter without losing any MP. But if you're lucky, damn, it's a win-win system. It's honestly baffling to me how the developers didn't adopt this gameplay mechanic. It makes a random encounter so much more enjoyable with this element of unpredictability. It sort of reminds me of the critical hit mechanic from Wizardry 7. Like, seriously, why do developers just decide to forget about those incredible gameplay mechanics and instead opt for something bland and unsatisfying?
George, I think you've leveled up while you were talking.
Alright, sorry I got carried away a bit. I just really like that spell. So yeah, we've leveled up and also found this strange looking thing. It says it's red hot. I know those games well enough to know not to touch something like this. I'll pass.
I strongly urge you to reconsider.
So it's something I actually have to do.
Yes, it's going to give you a mark without which you can't beat this game.
Amazing, and how was I supposed to know that?
You weren't. You were supposed to keep on experimenting and trying everything out. That's actually how you're meant to play an old game like this.
Fine. So now that we've touched a red hot glowing rod, we get one of the 4 marks we need to find. This one in particular allows you to level up past the 5th level. You know, I only now realize we are fairly set right now. We have enough food and equipment not to worry about dying anymore. There is a fair few enemies running around that give us money and our characters have a ton of HP to boot. Guess you finally left the beginner's hell of Ultima 3. You know, I've heard a lot of people complain about the beginning of Ultima 3 and, I couldn't disagree with them more. The experience of survival, of struggling to find food, to level up and to basically make a living, as well as get your general bearings on what to do in this world, it's incredibly engaging. While Ultima 2 was ridiculously difficult at the start and Ultima 1 was a bit too easy, this game strikes a perfect balance between the two. It feels like there are stakes at play, like you can actually starve to death and die, if you won't push yourself, that is. Yet it never becomes unfair. For the first 3 to 5 hours you're just barely scraping by, with every victory and discovery feeling like an achievement, and each piece of food and weapon you get feels like a hard-earned reward. Each of those rare enemies you find feels like an entire event. You are simultaneously happy since you want to get money and XP from him, as well as to just play around with the battle system, but you're also terrified. You don't know how powerful this monster will be. You might just die right there and then. Even the process of healing in a town becomes evocative. On one hand, it's safe in there, and you can relax and heal your wounds. On the other, healing takes time, and time means money. Yet, once again, it never reaches the degree of unfair trial and error of the second game. For instance, you get equipment from chests, as you know, which in a lot of ways alleviates the necessity to buy it. It's an ease-up, sure, but a welcome one. The player is already getting the stress of money management below the poverty line, thinking that he has to earn enough to buy armor and weapons, only for the game to give him a hand when he least expects it. It's a neat game design trick that ensures that the player's stress will inevitably turn into a sense of satisfaction. Still, even with this help, the only way to crawl out of the beginner's hell is by continuously putting yourself out there. You have to keep on exploring the map, delving into the dungeons, fighting enemies and slowly but surely leveling up, at least enough to increase their frequency of appearance. It's a far more gradual progression than what was in the first game, in which all you needed was to figure out that you get HP from exiting dungeons. It was an exploit you had to discover back then, but here the only way to beat the beginner's hell is to survive through it. So yeah, I've really enjoyed the first 8 or so hours of Ultima 3. In fact, if the entire game was this evocative, I would have called it a masterpiece, without a question. However, the further away we get from this brilliant start of the game, the more it all falls apart. This feeling started to creep in a couple hours after I've discovered an effective way to grind for money. Now, I personally don't mind grinding. If you recall, I had actually praised grinding in Ultima 1, but the reason why grind works so well in that game was because of its structure and, more importantly, simplicity of the overarching experience. Even though it's engaging in its own right, it was never quite as involving or stimulating an experience as Ultima 3. The experience of survival, with you being forced to adapt and learn the intricacies of this unfamiliar land, with towns full of people, with puzzles and hints, with actual gameplay-wise decisions to be made that may determine whether you live or die. Hell, even battles require you to be mentally present now. What I'm trying to say is that playing Ultima 3 requires you to actually pay attention, think, and adapt, like in a more conventional type of RPGs that we are all familiar with. So having to spend hours mindlessly grinding after having such a mentally stimulating gameplay feels like a far more jarring juxtaposition than what we had in Ultima 1, where grind felt like a natural part of its archaic gameplay. Furthermore, this game requires more grind than any of the previous ones, even though it's the only one that suffers from it.
I don't really see that as a big problem. Wizardry 7, which you like so much, also had instances where you had to grind. Didn't prevent you from enjoying it, though.
Yeah, I agree actually. If the excessive grind was the only problem of this game, I wouldn't mind it. But it's not. With each level up you get 100 extra HP, which is a big deal early on, but the further you get, the less significant this buff becomes, until it stops altogether. Level 25 marks the final upgrade to your HP. Since you don't get any benefit from leveling up anymore, there is no point to it and no point to random encounters. Getting XP and money was the incentive for defeating enemies, so after hitting the maximum HP cap and discovering the money grind routine, encounters lose something quite integral to them. They become a simple waste of time. However, surprisingly, you can still level up. And you know what that means? Before I proceed, keep in mind that there is no way to avoid combat, or, as we've learned, escape from it. Okay, now, let me remind you that frequency of encounters is still tied to your level. Boom. That's one hell of a devilish combo we have going on here, now that enemies don't reward you in any way, and so you don't have any desire to fight them. You get more random encounters than ever before. And the beautiful thing, right, is that the more you fight them and level up, the more they appear. So it becomes the opposite of rewarding, and it is actually something that harms you. It actually harms you to level up. That's ridiculous. That feels like an extravagant form of torture that Garriott just came up with. But if it's fun on its own right, the combat might be rewarding in itself. And as I've said, the combat here is rather fun. At first. You know how Final Fantasy games, or as I already mentioned, Wizardry, sort of evolve over the playthrough? You get more and more spells, abilities, party members, sometimes entire new mechanics, going so far that by the end of those games you have a list of options impenetrable for someone who would just try to take your controller and play. That's actually what makes those games consistently engaging. They get more complex over time. Ultima 3 doesn't. At a certain point you realize that ranged weaponry, the bow in particular, is all you need to beat the entire game. You do get more attack spells as your mana pool increases, but They are just variations of either spells that damage all enemies on screen or ranged attack spells. Do you see the problem here? And that is the entire depth of the combat system in this game. Oh, you do realize that this is nowhere near enough to sustain a 30-hour-long game. There should have been more unique abilities to enemies, more variety to battlefields. I don't know, just something. So the paradoxical thing is that combat in Ultima 3 is more interesting at the start than afterwards. And because of that, it becomes a complete and utter chore. And this is where the leveling problem comes in. The less enjoyable and rewarding the combat becomes on its own, the more of it you get. As an example of how problematic it gets, let me briefly talk about the boat, which has the most god-awful controls I've ever seen in a video game. Honestly, this observation doesn't even fit into the review's narrative. I really hate how the boat controls here. The wind direction is randomly decided each second. If it's calm or if it comes from the direction where you need to go, you have to wait. So each second there is a 2 out of 5 chances that you'll be prevented from moving where you need to go for no apparent reason. But believe it or not, it's not even the biggest problem with the boat. That would be the fact that it just refuses to spawn. I was lucky enough to have stumbled upon it early on, but there is a way to lose it, you see, and you actually need the boat in this game. It's absolutely mandatory, yet it did not spawn. I spent hours walking around searching for another one. I even tried a trick I've read about on forums. No luck. In the end, I've resorted to cheating and followed the instructions of this guy, which I'm so glad I did. I kid you not, the pirates did spawn eventually. About a dozen hours after I've cheated to get the damn ship, I've played through most of the game by that point. Remember that the more you level up, the more enemies you encounter, so if there is one thing the player doesn't want, is to spend more time than necessary in an enemy-infested place. But here I would have to spend 10 hours just walking around, waiting for the dice to roll in my favor, without any ability to progress the game or skip any of the fights. So yeah, it is a very small oversight, but it can completely kill the experience of an unlucky player. If I didn't cheat back there, I don't think I would be able to make this video at all. However, there is something even worse. If you're truly unlucky, you'll get unlucky with the dungeons. This game features 7 dungeons, which you can approach in any order you choose. I must say that those dungeons are actually wonderfully laid out. They are miles ahead of what we've seen in previous games. The ultimate purpose of dungeon exploration here is to discover the 4 types of marks, each type of which appears in several dungeons. This leads to a rather open-ended gameplay scenario. You don't have to beat every dungeon to complete the game. In fact, you only have to play through 3 or 4. And yeah, this is actually an awesome concept. Different players will pick different dungeons, all leading to drastically different yet equally enjoyable experiences. Except not really. 2 out of those 7 dungeons are mandatory. One has a snake mark, of which there is no duplicate, and another has a clue without which you couldn't beat the game. There are no hints that indicate the significance of those particular dungeons, so it might very well be that a player will pick the other 5 dungeons before those ones. So, because of his bad luck, he will be forced to play through every single dungeon in this so-called open-ended game. Now, you might be wondering, what's the big deal here? If the dungeons are well designed, as you've said they were, George, then surely exploring them shouldn't be a pain. Well, it ain't that simple, you see. When you explore your first dungeon, it isn't actually bad at all. going around mapping every floor while the combat still retains its novelty, and every defeated enemy gives you valuable experience and money. It feels purposeful, like you are not just wasting time in there, but progressing towards something. But as we know already, the more you play, the less important the experience becomes, and the more apparent the shallowness of the unavoidable combat system. Just imagine how agitating the dungeon exploration becomes after you've hit the 25th level. You're not only sick of those repetitive random encounters that play out exactly the same way they did when you just started the game, but there is more of them, and they do not just feel pointless, they are harmful. No matter how good those dungeons might be, their core gameplay becomes so desperately unpleasant, it alone is enough to ruin them. But there is more. There are no unique items or equipment to find in those dungeons. What is the point of exploring them when there is no reward whatsoever for doing that? Just to suffer through those tedious random battles? Thank freaking God for Piran gems. Now, do you see why playing through more than 3 dungeons per playthrough might be a bit undesirable? In fact, I would say 3 is already one too many. It's honestly remarkable how this game deflates over time. At the start, as you recall, every aspect of it worked perfectly together. The battles were rare, so they didn't outstay their welcome. The leveling gave you significant upgrades to HP, so it felt rewarding. Each bit of money you got your hands on felt useful and important. Yet instead of building upon that wonderful foundation, the overall gameplay here just falls apart more and more, until eventually it just breaks. And this is the single biggest problem of Ultima 3. The RPG, battle and economy systems here, they do not just stagnate over time, they actively devolve as you progress through the game. It's like, the developers, they thought out everything about how the game will play at the start, but they didn't put any thought into how the game will play at the end. So by the time you get to this end, Ultima 3 pretty much loses everything it had going for it. It's the exact opposite of Ultima 1, which became more and more engaging and complex as you kept learning its mechanics and exploits, which I akin to solving a Rubik's Cube. But speaking of puzzles, the puzzle solving here is actually surprisingly good. In Ultima 2, puzzles were ridiculously cryptic, so I'm happy to say that the developers decided to dial it back a bit here. There is a bit of Zelda-esque backtracking going on. The more marks, clues and other things you discover, the more areas you get access to, and within those areas you discover new hints. There are 2 puzzle-solving lines of finding the hidden town of Dawn and discovering the locations of the exotic weapons. Wait, exotic weapons? Why couldn't they put those at the bottom levels of dungeons to give purpose to... Never mind. Still, everything that has to do with towns and the overworld exploration is wonderfully done here. Especially the ending. Now, in previous games, the final castles were nothing special, they were just there for the purpose of being there. In Ultima 3, however, my god, that final castle was a blast. There is something so incredibly climactic about the way it's laid out, with the prisoners and demons you can talk to, with those numerous hazards you can only overcome with all 4 marks discovered, with this terrific gauntlet of the toughest enemies in the game which you have to endure without being able to heal yourself because, in this castle, with each turn you risk getting damaged. Until eventually you get to the final room with not a final boss, but a final puzzle. It's absolutely amazing. I really don't want to spoil it for you, but I just freaking love that castle. It almost made up for the rest of the game. Almost. Hey, so I'm recording this somewhat after the fact. I've been going through the old PC gaming magazines from the 90s. as you do. And what actually shocked me was that the ending of Ultima 3, you know, like the one I praised, like the second coming of Christ, was considered to be one of the worst of all time. Together with my equally positive opinion of the start of the game, this might turn out to be my most controversial video yet. Which is not something I thought I'd ever say. I'm not crazy, am I? Leave a comment down below, and also don't forget. It is tempting to say that Ultima 3 follows the principle of start strong and end strong, but I just can't say that. That final castle takes no more than 30 minutes, while the tedium that precedes it is about 20 hours. Still, I really can't call this a bad game, because there is a lot of greatness in it, especially those brilliant 7 to 8 hours of survival gameplay at the start. So yeah, taken as a whole, I'd say that Ultima 3 is a mediocre game. I'd still recommend you to check it out though. Just try to keep in mind its flaws. Don't try to complete this game. Trust me, don't complete every single dungeon in this game. Just take the shortest route to the finish line and be done with it as quick as possible.
Yes, it's really an example of a game that was revolutionary at the time, but doesn't hold up as well in retrospect. Ultima 4, on the other hand.
I really do hope you won't be regretting saying that, Seal.
Considering that you'll be the one playing it, why should I?
You are a cruel bastard, you know.